My name is Simone, and I am 38 years old. My husband of 7 years looked me in my eyes in front of a judge and told the court he had no idea who I was because of a car accident that didn't even leave a scratch on his bumper. He thought his fake amnesia was a get-out-of-jail-free card to keep the $4 million we built together, but I had receipts he didn't even know existed.
Before I tell you how I turned his memory loss into a life sentence of being broke, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever been underestimated by the people who are supposed to love you most. The air conditioning in the Fulton County Courthouse always feels like it's set to Arctic tundra, but today the chill wasn't coming from the vents. It was coming from the man sitting at the table to my right. Marcus was leaned back in his chair, looking like he was posing for the cover of GQ instead of attending a high-stakes divorce hearing. He was wearing a custom-tailored navy blue Tom Ford suit that I knew, for a fact, cost $5,800. He had his legs crossed, showing off those Italian leather loafers with no socks, and a Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist. That watch alone was worth $45,000.
And yet, when the judge asked him to identify me, he did this little dramatic squint, like he was trying to solve a difficult math problem. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice smooth as expensive bourbon. "I see the lady sitting there. I see she's upset. But I'm telling you, since the accident, everything before last November is just dark. I don't know who she is. I don't know why she's claiming we were married, and I certainly don't know why she thinks I owe her any money." I sat there like a statue. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't even blink. Back at Howard, my girls used to call me the Ice Queen because I could keep a straight face while the world was burning down around me. Being a clinical pharmacist teaches you that. You have to be precise. You have to be calm. You have to watch the dosage. I looked down at my own hands. I wasn't wearing my 3-carat diamond engagement ring. I wasn't wearing my Chanel suit. I had on a plain, charcoal gray blazer from Ann Taylor, and my hair was pulled back in a low, sensible bun. I looked like a woman who spent her days counting pills and her nights reading medical journals. I looked boring. I looked safe. I looked like someone Marcus could easily slide past. Marcus's lawyer, a shark named Sterling, who probably charged $900 an hour, stood up and adjusted his glasses. "Your Honor, my client suffered a significant concussive event," Sterling said, dropping a thick stack of papers onto the judge's desk. "The medical records from the North Atlanta Wellness Center are clear. Marcus has no recollection of his life with the petitioner. To force him to pay alimony or split his assets with a woman he doesn't recognize would be a gross miscarriage of justice, especially since Mr. Marcus is currently unemployed and living off the charity of his family." The charity of his family. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. Marcus hadn't worked a real job since 2018. While I was pulling 12-hour shifts at the hospital and managing a side business in medical consulting that brought in over $300,000 a year. Marcus was networking. He spent his days at the cigar bars in Buckhead buying rounds of drinks for investors using my credit cards. He spent his nights at development meetings that usually ended with him stumbling home smelling like cheap perfume and expensive gin. "Mrs. Robinson," Judge Miller said, looking over her spectacles at me. She looked tired. She'd probably seen 100 fake ballers walk through her courtroom this month. "Do you have any response to these medical claims? Your husband, or, well, Mr. Marcus, claims he has zero memory of your 7-year marriage. He also claims he has no assets, no bank accounts, no property, nothing but the clothes on his back." I took a slow, deep breath.
I felt the weight of the digital recorder in my purse, but I wasn't ready to play that card yet. You don't jump to the finish line when the race just started. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady and quiet. I understand that Marcus is confused. It must be very difficult to forget the person who paid for your car, your clothes, and your mother's hip replacement last June. That surgery alone cost $22,400.80, which I paid in cash. Marcus let out a soft, theatrical sigh. He turned to his lawyer and whispered, just loud enough for the judge to hear, "Is she still talking about money? This is so uncomfortable. I feel like I'm being harassed by a stranger." The audacity was truly something to behold. This was a man who, just 3 months ago, was crying in my arms because he'd accidentally spent $10,000 of our mortgage money on a business opportunity that turned out to be a crypto scam. Now I was a stranger? The math just isn't mathing, Your Honor, I continued, ignoring his little sideshow. If Marcus is penniless and living on charity, I'd love to know how he's currently paying the $6,000 monthly rent on a luxury penthouse in Midtown. I'd also love to know how a man with no memory managed to change all the passwords to our joint investment accounts the day after he walked out on me. Sterling, the lawyer, jumped in immediately. Speculation, Your Honor. Those accounts were never joint. They belong to Marcus's family trust. My client is a victim of a woman trying to gold dig a man who doesn't even know her name. Gold dig? I was the one who bought the gold. I was the one who mined it. Marcus leaned forward then, his eyes locking onto mine. For a split second, the clueless victim mask slipped. I saw the arrogance. I saw the narcissism. He thought he'd won. He really believed that because he'd wiped the paper trail and moved the money into his sister Tasha's name, I was going to walk away with nothing. He didn't realize that while he was busy playing big baller at the club, I was the one who had set up the home network. I was the one who had the Find My Phone linked to every device in that house. And most importantly, I was the one who had installed the high-definition security cameras in our home office that uploaded everything to a private server he didn't even know existed. I just want this to be over, Marcus said, his voice cracking with fake emotion. I don't want to fight this lady. I just want to focus on my recovery. I can't even remember my own wedding day. It's like a hole in my soul. Judge Miller sighed and rubbed her temples. We're going to adjourn for today. I want a full financial disclosure from Mr. Marcus by Monday morning. And I want an independent medical evaluation. We aren't going to rely on a wellness center that looks like a glorified spa. As the judge stood up, Marcus hopped out of his chair with a little too much energy for a man with a traumatic brain injury. He didn't even look at me as he straightened his Tom Ford jacket. "Bless her heart," I heard him mutter to Sterling as they started to walk toward the back of the courtroom. "She really thinks she's going to get a dime. She's just a pharmacist. She should stick to counting pills and leave the big moves to the men." He thought he was being quiet, but in a courtroom, everything echoes. I stayed in my seat until the room was almost empty. I pulled out my phone and opened an app. It showed a map of the city. A little blue dot was already moving. Fast. Marcus was heading straight to a jewelry store in Phipps Plaza. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully deleted me from his life like a bad file on a hard drive. But he forgot one small thing. I'm a pharmacist. I know exactly how to handle a toxic substance, and the dose I was about to give him was going to be lethal to his lifestyle. I watched the blue dot stop at a store called Icebox. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was going to spend another $10,000 of family charity on a new chain to celebrate his victory in court. I leaned back and smiled for the first time all day. He thought he'd erased our marriage, but he'd actually just given me the perfect opening to erase his entire future.
Now, y'all won't believe the level of delusion I had to live with before we ended up in that frozen courtroom. I sat in my parked car outside the courthouse, watching that little blue dot on my phone screen hover over the Icebox jewelry store, and I had to take a second to just breathe. It's funny how a man can forget his wife's face, but his feet can find their way to a diamond shop in Phipps Plaza without a single map.
To understand why I wasn't falling apart, you have to understand the museum of lies we called a marriage. See, Marcus didn't just wake up one day and decide to be a narcissist. He'd been practicing for years. We lived in a stunning 5-bedroom traditional home in Buckhead that cost me $1,200,000. On the outside, we were the it couple. Every Sunday, we'd pull up to church in a car that cost more than some people's houses, and Marcus would jump out to open my door like he was the perfect gentleman. But once those front doors closed, the mask didn't just slip, it fell off and shattered. I remember one Tuesday evening last year like it was yesterday. I'd just finished a 14-hour shift at the hospital, my feet were aching, my head was spinning from checking 500 different prescriptions, and all I wanted was a glass of wine and silence. I walked into the kitchen, and there was Marcus, leaning against our white Carrara marble island, holding a crystal tumbler of Macallan 25-year-old Sherry Oak Highland Single Malt Scotch whiskey, a bottle that I specifically remember paying $2,500 for at a private auction. He wasn't alone. He had 3 of his business associates with him. These were men who wore shiny suits and talked about leverage and disruption, but never seemed to have an office address that wasn't a Starbucks. "And here she is," Marcus announced, spreading his arms wide like he was introducing a prize pony. "The woman who keeps the engine running while I'm out here building the empire." He didn't ask if I was tired. He didn't ask if I'd eaten. He just looked at me with that fake baller grin and said, "Baby, tell Daryl here about that $750,000 expansion we were talking about for the firm." I didn't blink. I just set my bag down. A simple, structured leather tote that didn't scream money, but cost $3,200, and gave them a small, tight smile. This was my gray rock training in action. I was boring. I was a wall. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "The numbers are still in the audit phase, Marcus," I said quietly. "See?" Marcus laughed, turning back to his friends. "Precision. That's why I brought her on. She handles the small stuff, so I can focus on the 8-figure deals." The small stuff was the mortgage. The small stuff was the $4,000 monthly HOA fees. The small stuff was the fact that his empire currently had a bank balance of $12.42. Once the associates finally left, Marcus's face changed. The warmth evaporated. He looked at me like I was a smudge on his $400 Tom Ford tie. "You could have been a little more enthusiastic," he snapped, pouring himself another $400 worth of scotch. "I'm trying to close a deal that could bring in $5 million, and you're acting like a disgruntled librarian. Do you know how hard it is to maintain these connections?" "I know it's expensive, Marcus," I said, walking toward the stairs. "I saw the statement for the country club. $6,500 for a networking dinner? The math just isn't mathing for me." He stepped in front of me, smelling like expensive cigars and arrogance. "It's called an investment, Simone, but I wouldn't expect a pharmacist to understand high-level finance. You just count pills. I move mountains." That was his favorite line. He wanted me to feel small so he could feel like a giant. He wanted me to believe that my 6-figure salary was just a base for his imaginary millions. The next morning, I woke up to find a
gift in the driveway. It was a brand new Land Rover Defender in Carpathian gray, glistening under the Georgia sun. It was gorgeous, it was rugged, and it had a sticker price of $98,000.
Surprise! Marcus shouted from the porch, wearing a silk robe that cost $900. I knew you were stressed, so I got us a little something to take to the lake house this weekend. I looked at the paperwork on the dashboard. It wasn't a purchase, it was a lease. A high-interest, please rob me lease with a $5,000 monthly payment. And guess whose name he'd forged on the co-signer line?
Marcus, we don't need another car, I said, my voice as cold as that courtroom. And we definitely don't need a $5,000 monthly bill for a vehicle we can't afford.
He rolled his eyes and sighed, that loud, dramatic narcissist sigh that makes you feel like you're the crazy one. There you go again, thinking small. God, Simone, sometimes I think you're trying to hold me back. My mother was right. She said I needed a woman who understood the golden child mantle I carry. Someone who went to an HBCU and understood the culture of excellence, not someone who just wants to sit on a pile of money and do nothing. He knew that hit home. I'm proud of my Spelman degree. I'm proud of the work I put in. But he used my culture and my background like a weapon. He made it seem like being responsible was a betrayal of the dream. I'm going to the pharmacy, I said, turning my back on him and the car. Yeah, go count your little pills, he yelled after me, while I'm out here making sure we actually have a legacy. I got into my old reliable SUV, the one I'd actually paid for, and drove straight to a private investigator's office I'd found through a Spelman sister. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just handed over a check for $5,000 and said, I need to know every single place his investments are going. For the next 6 months, I played the part. I went to the Sunday dinners at Big Mama's house where Miss Hattie would sit at the head of the table and talk about how blessed Marcus was to be such a provider. I sat there while they ate the roast beef and greens I'd paid for, listening to Marcus tell stories about deals that never happened. I watched him buy a Patek Philippe watch for $45,000 using a credit card he'd opened in my name without me knowing. I watched him donate $10,000 to the church's building fund just so he could get a front row seat and a shout out from the pulpit, while our actual light bill was sitting in my purse with a past due stamp on it. He thought he was playing me. He thought I was the gray rock because I was too stupid to see the truth. He didn't realize I was the gray rock because I was becoming an anchor. By the time he had the accident and lost his memory, I already had a digital folder titled The Paper Trail. It contained every forged signature, every secret bank account, and every business trip he'd taken to Miami with a woman who definitely wasn't me. Back in the present, I watched the blue dot on my phone move away from Icebox. He was heading toward the Midtown penthouse. He really thought he'd escaped. He thought that by claiming amnesia, he could just delete the debt and the wife and keep the lifestyle. He forgot that a pharmacist knows exactly how to read a label, and I'd already labeled him for exactly what he was: a fraud. I put my car in gear and started the engine. I wasn't going home. I was going to meet Janelle. It was time to look at the toxicology of those joint accounts. He thought he was the one moving mountains, but he didn't realize I'd already planted the dynamite at the base. Now, y'all know Sunday dinner is supposed to be about grace and gratitude, but at Miss Hattie's house, it was mostly about gaslighting and gravy. After watching Marcus scurry off to the jewelry store like a rat to cheese, I had to prepare myself for the weekly Golden Child worship service. This was just 2 weeks before the courtroom drama, back when Marcus was still pretending he had brain fog, but could still perfectly navigate a wine list. I pulled my SUV up to Miss Hattie's house in Cascade. It's a beautiful, sprawling ranch-style home that I personally spent $85,000 to renovate 3 years ago. I'd put in the custom chef's kitchen with the 6-burner Wolf range, which cost $12,400, and the restoration hardware cloud couch that set me back another $8,900. But the second I stepped through that door, I was treated like the help who'd forgotten to polish the silver. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and narcissism. "Oh, look who decided to join us," Marcus's sister Tasha said. She was leaning against my expensive marble island, sipping wine from a crystal glass. She was wearing a pair of Versace Medusa Biggie sunglasses inside the house, glasses I knew cost $550, and she didn't even bother to take them off. "We thought you'd be too busy working to spend time with the family." She put working in quotes, like being a pharmacist was a hobby I did to avoid them. "I just finished a shift, Tasha," I said, keeping my voice as flat as a pancake. "Gray Rock, don't give them a spark or they'll start a forest fire. Where's Marcus?" "My brother is in the dining room resting his mind," Miss Hattie said, walking in with a pot of greens. She was wearing her Sunday best, a knit suit that probably cost $850, and her church mother face was firmly in place. "He's had a very stressful week trying to remember his own life. The doctor said he needs supportive environments, Simone, not people constantly badgering him about bills and responsibilities." I followed her into the dining room. There sat Marcus at the head of the table. He was wearing a Burberry cashmere sweater, another $2,100 gift from our joint account, and he had a silk scarf draped around his neck like he was an old money tycoon on a yacht. He looked up at me and gave me that blank, "who are you" stare that he'd been perfecting. "Hello," he said, his voice soft and airy. "I'm sorry. Have we met at the pharmacy? You look familiar." The audacity was so thick you could have cut it with a steak knife. I sat down at the far end of the table, away from the inner circle. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Miss Hattie started carving a prime rib that I'd seen the receipt for, $242 from the high-end butcher in Buckhead. She slid a thick, juicy slice onto Marcus's plate. Then she gave one to Tasha. Then she gave one to herself. When she got to me, she scraped the bottom of the pan. She put 2 thin, burnt ends and a pile of cold fat on my plate. "Bless your heart, Simone," Miss Hattie said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're so focused on your career, I figured you wouldn't want anything too heavy. You have to stay sharp for all those little pills you count, right?" "Thank you, Miss Hattie," I said. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for a better cut. I just picked up my fork and moved the fat around. "You know," Tasha said, taking a loud sip of her wine, "Marcus was telling us, well, he was trying to tell us before his head started hurting, that he thinks some of his personal property has gone missing, his watches, his investments. He's worried that while he's been sick, someone has been taking advantage of his confusion." She looked right at me. The flying monkeys were in full formation. This was the setup. They were laying the groundwork to claim I was stealing from a disabled man. "That's interesting," I said, my voice calm, "considering Marcus is the only one with the keys to the safe deposit box, the one that holds $35,000 in gold coins we bought last year." Marcus suddenly winced and grabbed his temples. "The box. I don't remember a box. Why is she talking about gold? Mama, my head is spinning. It's like she's trying to trap me with words.
Now look what you've done, Miss Hattie snapped, dropping her fork with a loud clatter on the fine china. You're triggering his episodes. Can't you just for one day be a supportive wife instead of an accountant? The boy is suffering. He's a scapegoat for your greed.
I'm just stating facts, Miss Hattie, I replied. Facts? Tasha laughed, her Versace glasses sliding down her nose. The only fact is that my brother is a golden child who worked himself into a breakdown trying to provide for a woman who doesn't appreciate him. We all know you're just mad because he's finally seen through you. Even with a broken memory, his soul knows you're an enabler of his stress. The irony was delicious. I was the one paying for the roast beef, the wine, the house, and the very clothes on their backs, yet I was the villain because I asked where the money went. Marcus looked up from his fake episode and looked at my plate of scraps. A small, cruel smirk flickered across his face for half a second, so fast that nobody else saw it. It was a look of pure triumph. He really thought that by treating me like a stranger in my own life, he could break my spirit and make me just hand over the keys to the kingdom.
I think I need to go lie down, Marcus whispered. The energy in here is just heavy. It's toxic. Of course, baby, Miss Hattie cooed, standing up to help him like he was a toddler. Tasha, help your brother to the guest suite. Simone, since you didn't contribute anything to the meal but attitude, you can handle the dishes. The Le Creuset pots need to be hand-washed. That set cost me $500, and I won't have you scratching them. She lied. I'd bought that Le Creuset set for her 2024 Christmas present for $850. I stood up, but I didn't go to the sink. I pulled out my phone. Actually, I haven't really shift tomorrow, I said, picking up my purse. I looked at Marcus, who was leaning heavily on Tasha like he couldn't walk. I hope you feel better, Marcus. Memory is a tricky thing. Sometimes it comes back when you least expect it, like when a forensic auditor starts knocking on the door. The room went dead silent. Marcus's paralyzed leg gave a little twitch. What is that supposed to mean? Miss Hattie hissed. It means the roast beef was lovely, I said, walking toward the door. But the math still isn't mathing. Good night. As I walked out to my car, I could hear them starting to yell inside. They thought they were the ones in control because they had the golden child and the loudest voices. They thought that by giving me scraps at the table, they were showing me my place. But they forgot one thing about a gray rock. We don't burn, and we don't break. We just wait for the right moment to become an avalanche. I got in my car and opened my notes app. I typed, Sunday dinner. Marcus confirmed he doesn't remember the safe deposit box. Witnessed by Hattie and Tasha, 6:42 p.m. He thought he'd won the day, but he forgot I still had the login to the cloud and I just recorded the whole dinner on my phone. Now, y'all, after I walked out of Miss Hattie's house with that smell of greasy greens and disrespect clinging to my hair, I didn't go home to cry into a pillow. I didn't even go home to our $1,200,000 house in Buckhead. I drove straight to a quiet, dimly lit parking lot behind a 2-story Starbucks in Vinings to meet Janelle. Janelle and I go back to our freshman year at Spelman. She was the one who taught me how to stay composed when the world was trying to rattle my cage. And she was the only person who knew that my boring pharmacist persona was actually a tactical vest. She was sitting in her blacked-out Porsche Cayenne, a vehicle that cost $105,000, with her laptop glowing like a beacon in the dark. The math wasn't mathing at dinner, was it? Janelle asked as I climbed into the passenger seat. The interior smelled like expensive leather and $300 Creed Aventus perfume. Marcus sat there and told the whole table he didn't know what a safe deposit box was, while wearing a sweater that cost $2,100. I said, leaning my head back. He's getting bold, Janelle. He's starting to believe his own lies.
Janelle didn't say a word. She just turned the laptop screen toward me. He's not just lying, Simone. He's building a kingdom on your back. Look at this. She pointed to a deed transfer. It was for a property in Alpharetta, the kind of area where the driveways are longer than most people's city blocks. The purchase price was $5,200,000. It was bought through a shell company called M Legacy Holdings. M Legacy? I whispered. The narcissist couldn't even pick a name that didn't start with his own initial. Check the signature on the financing documents, Simone said, her voice dropping an octave. I leaned in. There it was, my name. My signature, written in a flowery, perfect script that looked more like my handwriting than I did. He'd used my credit score, which I'd spent 15 years keeping at a perfect $850, to secure a mortgage with a monthly payment of $28,400.60. He forged my name on a $5 million liability while pretending he can't remember how to use a toaster, I said. I felt a cold, sharp prickle of ice in my veins. It wasn't sadness. It was the gray rock turning into a diamond. It gets worse, Janelle said. I tracked the GPS on that Land Rover lease you mentioned. He's there right now, and he's not alone. We didn't waste another second. We took Janelle's Porsche because Marcus didn't know her car, and we drove north. The farther we got from the city, the bigger the trees got and the more the streetlights disappeared. We pulled into a gated community where the guard gate alone looked like it cost $300,000. Janelle flashed a badge she'd gotten from her PI contact, and we were in. We killed the lights and rolled slowly up a winding driveway lined with $200,000 worth of professional landscaping. At the top of the hill sat a French provincial mansion. It was a monster of stone and glass, with a 5-car garage and a fountain in the front that probably used $1,000 worth of water a month. I looked at the house. This was where my money was going. The $400,000 I'd lost in that crypto scam last year, it wasn't in a digital wallet. It was in these stone walls. The $12,000 I thought went to his mother's hip surgery, it was probably in the Sub-Zero refrigerator and the Wolf double ovens I could see through the massive kitchen window. Look, Janelle whispered. The front door opened. Out walked Marcus. He wasn't wearing his brain fog scarf or his struggling artist expression. He was wearing a silk robe from Versace that cost $2,500 and holding a glass of Louis XIII cognac, a bottle that retails for $4,600. He looked happy, he looked vibrant, he looked like a man who remembered exactly how to live the high life. Then a woman walked out behind him. She was young, maybe 25, wearing a La Perla silk slip dress that cost $950. She draped her arms around his neck, and he leaned back and laughed, a loud, booming sound that echoed across the quiet Alpharetta hills. That must be the charity his lawyer was talking about, I said. My voice was a whisper, but it felt like a scream in my own ears. Her name is Crystal, Janelle said, tapping her tablet. She's a lifestyle influencer with a penchant for Chanel bags and 5-star travel. According to her Instagram, she's been living in this house for 3 months. She calls Marcus her private equity king. I watched them for a moment. Marcus leaned down and kissed her, his Patek Philippe watch catching the light from the outdoor chandeliers that I knew cost $15,000 apiece. He was using my hard-earned career, the nights I spent studying for the NAPLEX, the 12-hour shifts on my feet, the boring life I led, to fund a fantasy for a girl who wouldn't know a hard day's work if it hit her in the face. He was the fake baller, and she was the flying monkey in training, and they were both laughing at me. "Do you want me to call the police for the forgery right now?" Janelle asked. I took a deep breath. I watched Marcus take a sip of his $4,000 cognac. I watched him pull Crystal closer. "No," I said. "If I call the police now, he'll claim he was confused when he signed it. He'll use that amnesia defense to say he didn't know what he was doing. I don't want him in a jail cell for a few months. I want him under the jail for the rest of his life." "So what's the move?" "We wait," I said. "He thinks he's in the shadows. He thinks I'm sitting in Buckhead counting pennies and crying over my burnt beef scraps at Big Ma's. Let him keep spending. Every dollar he spends from that shell account is another nail in his coffin." I pulled out my phone and took a high-definition photo of the two of them on the porch. The image was crystal clear. It showed Marcus standing tall, no neck brace, no wheelchair, no darkness in his eyes. "He wanted a secret life," I whispered to the window. "I'm going to make sure he gets one, in a 6x8 cell." As we backed the Porsche out of the shadows, I saw Marcus point at something in the distance and laugh again. He looked so confident. He looked so untouchable. But as we cleared the gate, I looked at the financing documents Janelle had printed out. I saw a small detail he'd missed. To get the $5,200,000 loan, he'd used my inheritance trust as collateral, the one my grandfather, a man who worked 3 jobs to put me through school, had left for me. "He didn't just steal my money, he stole my legacy." Now, I wasn't just going for a divorce. I was going for a total forensic audit of his soul. He thought he'd hidden his mansion in the shadows, but he forgot that the sun always rises, and when it did, I was going to be the one holding the magnifying glass. He thought he'd won, but he forgot one small thing. I still had the keys to the server that monitored the M-Legacy accounts, and I just authorized a 2-cent transfer to see if he was watching the notifications. Now, y'all, after seeing that $5,200,000 mansion in Alpharetta, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat in my home office in Buckhead, staring at the screen of my $3,500 MacBook Pro, watching the M-Legacy accounts like a hawk. I was waiting for the next move, and I didn't have to wait long. The very next afternoon, Tasha and Marcus pulled into my driveway in that Carpathian gray Land Rover. You remember, the $98,000 lease Marcus had forged my name on? They hopped out looking like they were headed to a photo shoot for Vogue Business. Tasha was wearing a Fendi silk tracksuit that cost $3,200 and carrying a cognac ostrich Hermes Birkin bag that I knew for a fact she'd picked up for $12,500 using a business loan she'd taken out in my name. Marcus was back in his Amnesia chic outfit, a soft gray Brunello Cucinelli cashmere hoodie that cost $2,600. He was doing that slow, confused walk again, leaning on Tasha like his legs didn't quite remember how to function. I opened the door before they could even ring the bell. I kept my face blank. I wore my depressed outfit, an oversized Howard University sweatshirt and some old leggings. I wanted them to think I was falling apart. "Simone," Tasha said, her voice dripping with fake concern. She didn't wait for an invite, she just pushed past me into my foyer. "We were so worried after the way you ran out of Sunday dinner. Mama has been in a state. She thinks you're having a breakdown." "I'm just tired, Tasha," I said, my voice small. I looked at Marcus. "How are you feeling, Marcus?" Marcus blinked at me, doing that dramatic squint again. "The lights, they're very bright in here. I remember the smell of this house, but the faces, it's like looking through a foggy window." "He's struggling, Simone," Tasha snapped, sitting on my $8,000 velvet sofa and pulling a stack of papers out of her Birkin. And frankly, the medical bills from that wellness center are piling up. They just sent an invoice for $14,800.20 for his memory restoration therapy. We need liquid cash, and we need it now. The wellness center was basically a high-end spa where Marcus spent his days getting $400 massages and sitting in a cryotherapy chamber.
I don't have $14,000 lying around, Tasha, I said. Between the mortgage and the car leases Marcus forgot he signed, I'm stretched thin.
Tasha shared a look with Marcus. This was the moment. "Well," Tasha said, sliding a document across the coffee table, "we were thinking about Big Mama's house in Collier Heights. It's just sitting there, Simone. It's been appraised at $650,000. Since Big Mama left it to you and Marcus jointly, we think it's time to sell. It would cover Marcus's care and give you some breathing room." My heart skipped a beat, but my face didn't move. Big Mama's house wasn't just property. It was the house where I spent my summers learning how to bake biscuits and how to hold my head high. It was a piece of Black history in Atlanta. "I don't know," I whispered, playing the part of the broken woman. "I'm not in a headspace to make big decisions." "That's why I'm here to help," Tasha said, her voice turning sharp and predatory. She handed me a gold Mont Blanc pen, a pen that cost $750. "I've already spoken to a developer. He's willing to pay cash, $575,000. We just need you to sign this quitclaim deed to Marcus's trust so he can handle the closing. It'll take the stress off your plate." I looked at the document. It wasn't just a quitclaim deed for the Collier Heights house. Tucked right behind it was a second page, a power of attorney form that would give Marcus total control over my personal inheritance trust. They thought I was so medicated and depressed that I wouldn't bother to flip the page. They thought they could snatch my grandfather's legacy while I was staring at the floor. "It's for my health, Simone," Marcus said, his voice cracking with that fake therapy vocabulary he'd picked up. "I need boundaries from the stress of these assets. I need a safe space to heal my my brain injury. If you love me, you'll help me." Did he almost call himself a narcissist? The slip was so fast I almost missed it. "I just need a glass of water," I said, standing up shakily. "My head is pounding. Give me a second." I walked into the kitchen, hidden from their view. I didn't get water. I pulled a pre-printed dummy document out of my kitchen drawer. It was a replica of a quitclaim deed, but I'd changed the legal description of the property to a vacant 2-acre lot in the middle of a North Georgia swamp that I'd bought for $500 years ago for a tax write-off. I walked back into the living room, holding the dummy paper and the real power of attorney form. "Okay," I said, my hand trembling slightly as I picked up the $750 pen. "If this is what Marcus needs to get better, I'll sign." I scribbled my name on the dummy deed and the power of attorney. I watched Tasha's eyes light up. She looked like a wolf that had just been handed a steak. She snatched the papers back before the ink was even dry. "You're doing the right thing, Simone," Tasha said, tucking the papers into her Birkin. "Trust me. By next week, the $575,000 will be in the trust account, and you won't have to worry about a thing." "I hope so," I said. Marcus stood up, suddenly moving with a lot more grace than when he'd arrived. I feel a sense of peace already. Thank you, stranger." He actually patted me on the shoulder, like I was a helpful clerk at a grocery store. I watched them walk out to the Land Rover. Through the window, I saw Tasha give Marcus a high five. They didn't even wait to pull out of the driveway before they started laughing. Marcus pulled out his phone and started typing, probably telling Crystal and Alpharetta that the pharmacist had finally folded. What they didn't know was that while I was getting water, I'd activated the second part of my plan. I'd already sent a red flag alert to the title company they were planning to use. But that wasn't the best part. The power of attorney form I'd signed, I'd used a disappearing ink pen that my PI had given me. Within 2 hours, that page would be as blank as Marcus's supposed memory. The dummy deed, however, was very real. They were about to try and sell a swamp in a high-end real estate transaction. That's called wire fraud. And once they presented that document to the developer and accepted a deposit, they wouldn't just be dealing with a bitter wife. They'd be dealing with the SBI. The math was finally starting to math in my favor. I sat down at my kitchen island and pulled out my laptop. I opened the M Legacy account portal. "You wanted to sell Big Mama's house to pay for your therapy?" I whispered to the empty room. "Well, I hope you like the therapy they offer in the federal penitentiary." I watched as a notification popped up on my screen. Marcus had just spent $3,400 at a boutique in Buckhead. He was already spending the money from a sale that hadn't happened yet. He thought he'd pulled a fast one. He thought I was the fool who just handed over her life savings. But he forgot that a pharmacist knows exactly what happens when you mix the wrong chemicals. You get an explosion. And I was just about to light the fuse. Now, y'all, I'm telling you, the level of arrogance it takes to host a gala for your own recovery while you're actively scamming your wife is something they should study in medical journals. After Marcus and Tasha skipped out of my driveway thinking they'd secured the deed to Big Mama's house when they'd actually just signed for 2 acres of mosquito-infested mud in North Georgia, they decided it was time to celebrate. They organized the Marcus Robinson Foundation for Cognitive Recovery Gala. It sounds fancy, right? It was held at a 5-star hotel in Buckhead where the ballroom rental alone cost $25,000. I stood in my bedroom, looking at the gray rock I'd become. I didn't reach for my vintage Chanel. I didn't put on the $5,000 diamond studs Marcus bought me back when he was still trying to impress me. Instead, I went to the back of my closet and pulled out a simple, off-the-rack navy dress I'd bought at a clearance sale for $79. I put my hair in a low, tight bun and wore a pair of sensible 3-inch heels from Macy's. I looked like exactly what they wanted me to be, the boring wife who was just lucky to be invited. "Ready, Simone?" Janelle's voice came through my earpiece. She was parked in a service van across the street from the hotel, monitoring the frequencies. We'd spent $5,600 on high-tech, coin-sized recording devices that could pick up a heartbeat from across a crowded room. "I'm ready," I whispered. I tucked 3 of the devices into the lining of my cheap clutch. When I walked into that ballroom, the financial porn was almost overwhelming. The floral arrangements were massive towers of white orchids and gold-dipped roses. My florist friend told me those centerpieces easily cost $850 per table. There were 50 tables. You do the math. Marcus was center stage, standing under a spotlight that probably cost $1,200 for the night. He was wearing a custom-made white and gold brocade tuxedo jacket from a designer in Milan. I knew for a fact he'd paid $7,400 for that jacket using the emergency credit card he'd hidden in the HVAC vents at our house. He was holding a microphone, looking like he'd never seen a day of brain fog in his life. "I want to thank you all for coming," Marcus said, his voice booming through a sound system that cost $3,000 to rent. "As many of you know, my journey back from the darkness has been difficult, but seeing your support for my foundation, which will help other high achievers recover from traumatic cognitive events, makes it all worth it." I saw Miss Hattie in the front row wearing a custom silk gown that cost $4,200, nodding like she was at a Sunday morning service. Tasha was right next to her, clutching that $12,500 Birkin bag like it was a holy relic.
I started moving through the crowd, playing the part of the disgruntled former employee Marcus had labeled me in court. People looked at me with pity. Some looked at me with disgust. I didn't care. I was focused on the VIP lounge, the small, curtained-off area where the big ballers went to talk real business.
As I neared the entrance to the lounge, Marcus stepped in my way. He was holding a glass of crystal champagne, a bottle that goes for $550 at that hotel.
"Oh, Simone," he said, loud enough for the nearby donors to hear. He didn't use my name like a husband. He said it like he was trying to remember a distant cousin he didn't like. "I'm so glad you could make it. I know the pharmacist schedule is grueling. Did you find a ride home, or do you need me to call you an Uber? I'd hate for you to feel out of place among these visionaries." The donors chuckled. One woman, draped in at least $50,000 worth of David Yurman jewelry, gave me a look that said I should have stayed in the pharmacy. "I'm just here to support the cause, Marcus," I said, my voice low and shaky. I looked at the floor. I was the perfect scapegoat. "I'm happy to see you're feeling better."
"Better? I'm reborn," Marcus laughed, leaning in close so only I could hear. The smell of $300 cologne and betrayal was heavy. By Monday, that Collier Heights sale is going to clear, and I'll have enough to buy and sell you 10 times over. Why don't you go find the buffet? I think they have some burnt ends just for you." He patted my cheek, a condescending, disgusting gesture, and turned his back on me to greet a man who looked like he owned half of downtown Atlanta. I didn't argue, I didn't make a scene. I just slipped past the velvet rope while the security guard was busy looking at Marcus's flashy tuxedo. Inside the VIP lounge, the air was thick with the scent of $400 cigars and narcissism. I moved toward the back, near the private bar, where a bottle of Louis XIII stood like a trophy. I reached into my clutch, pulled out the first device, and pressed it into the underside of the mahogany bar top. 1. I moved to the lounge area where Marcus's inner circle of flying monkeys and fake rich associates were sitting. I dropped the second device into a deep crease of the $8,000 leather sofa. 2. Finally, I made my way to this small podium where Marcus was planning to hold his private auction later. I slid the third device into the cable housing for the microphone. 3. Simone? What are you doing back here? It was Tasha. She was standing there, her Fendi tracksuit replaced by a sequined gown that probably cost $3,800. She had her arms crossed, looking at me with total suspicion. "I was just looking for a quiet place," I said, putting on my best "I'm about to cry" face. "The noise, it's a lot. Marcus was so mean to me out there." Tasha laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Marcus is a king, Simone, and kings don't have time for peasants. You should have known your place years ago. But don't worry, once the M Legacy accounts are full next week, we won't ever have to see your plain face again. Now get out before I have security throw you out." "I'm going," I whispered. I walked out of that ballroom, past the $500 centerpieces and the $7,000 tuxedo. I walked out into the cool Atlanta night and got into my SUV. I put on my headphones. "Janelle, are we live?" "Loud and clear, Spellman's sister," Janelle's voice crackled. "I've got the audio, and oh boy, Marcus is already talking. He's in the VIP lounge right now." I listened. Marcus's voice came through, clear as a bell. "Can you believe she signed it? Marcus was laughing. I could hear the clink of his $500 champagne glass. She actually thought I was going to use the money for therapy. That pharmacist is as dumb as she is boring. The developer already wired the $50,000 earnest money deposit to the Shell account. We're heading to Vegas on Tuesday, Crystal. I've got a $10,000 suite booked at the Wynn. I sat in the dark, a small smile spreading across my face. He'd just admitted to the scam, named his mistress, and confirmed he'd accepted money for a fraudulent deed, all on a high-definition recording. The math wasn't just mathing anymore. It was adding up to a life sentence. Marcus thought he was the lion in that ballroom, but he was really just a mouse walking into a cage I'd been building for 6 months. He thought he'd snubbed me, but he'd actually just given me the front row seat to his own destruction. "Janelle," I said into the mic, "make sure you save that clip of him calling the developer. We're going to need it for Phase 3. He thought the M legacy was his ticket to the high life, but he forgot that a legacy is something you build with honor, not something you steal with a forged signature and a fake headache." Now, y'all, listening to Marcus brag about his Vegas plans while I sat in my car outside that hotel was like drinking a cold glass of lemonade on a Georgia July afternoon. It was crisp, it was sweet, and it was exactly what I needed to keep going. He was so busy celebrating his victory over his boring wife that he didn't even realize he'd just handed me the rope I was going to use to hang his entire lifestyle. I didn't go home. I didn't want to be anywhere near the house Marcus and I used to share. Instead, I drove to a high-security office building in Midtown, where Janelle keeps her private practice. Janelle isn't just a Spellman sister. She's a forensic accountant who has dismantled 8-figure empires for breakfast. When we were at Spellman, she was the one who could find a missing $5 bill in a laundry basket full of clothes. Now, she finds millions hidden in the Caymans. The lobby of her office was all glass and brushed steel. I took the private elevator up to the 20th floor. When the doors opened, the air smelled like expensive white tea candles and $500 an hour ambition. Janelle was standing behind a desk made of a single slab of reclaimed oak that probably cost $15,000. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit from Max Mara, a $3,200 look, and her hair was laid in a bob so sharp it could cut paper. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Simone," Janelle said, but she was smiling. She knew better. "I've seen a man who thinks he's invisible," I said, setting my clutch on her desk. "Did you get the audio from the gala?" "I got the audio, the video, and the digital heartbeat of every transaction he's made in the last 3 hours," Janelle said. She motioned to a man sitting in the corner, surrounded by 3 monitors that looked like they belonged in a NASA control room. "Simone, meet Malik. He's the best cybersecurity expert money can buy. I put him on a $20,000 retainer this morning." Malik gave me a nod. He didn't look like a big baller. He wore a simple black hoodie and a pair of $500 Balenciaga sneakers. He was the kind of person Marcus would ignore at a party, which made him Marcus's worst nightmare. "All right, Malik," Janelle said, leaning over the monitors. "Show her the toxicology report on the M legacy accounts." Malik's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Your husband is flashy, Mrs. Robinson, but he's predictable. He thinks that by moving money through a shell company, it disappears, but every digital dollar leaves a cent. I tracked the $50,000 deposit from that developer he scammed today. It didn't stay in the account for more than 10 minutes. "Where did it go?" I asked. "He moved it into a cold storage crypto wallet," Malik said, pulling up a string of complex code. "But here's the funny part. Narcissists always leave a signature. He named the wallet King_Marcus88, and the recovery password, it was the name of your old dog, King." I had to lean against the desk. $850,000. That was the current balance in that crypto wallet. $850,000 that Marcus had been siphoning off from our joint investments, my pharmacy bonuses, and even the emergency fund I'd set up for Big Mama's future care. He's been building this nest egg for 2 years, Simone, Janelle said, her voice dropping that therapy vocabulary we'd been using. This wasn't a snap decision after an accident. This was a calculated, long-term play. He was gaslighting you into thinking the market was down while he was buying Bitcoin at the bottom using your 6-figure salary. The math is finally mathing, I whispered. He wasn't just forgetting to pay the light bill, he was choosing to use that money to build a life for him and Crystal. Exactly, Janelle said. She pulled up another file. And look at the financial porn on this Alpharetta mansion. To secure the $5,200,000 loan, he didn't just forge your name, he submitted a fraudulent letter of intent from a fake medical supply company he claimed you were starting. He told the bank you were projected to make $2 million in your first year. The level of the fraud was staggering. He'd turned my quiet, respectable life into a fictional blockbuster just to get a house he couldn't afford. So what's the trap? I asked. Malik spun his chair around. He's going to Vegas on Tuesday, right? He thinks he's going to use that $10,000 suite at the Wynn to celebrate. I've already planted a back door in his crypto wallet. The second he tries to convert any of that $850,000 into cash at a Vegas casino, the system will trigger a suspicious activity report directly to the IRS and the FBI. But wait, I said, if the FBI seizes it, do I lose it too?
Janelle smiled, and it was a cold, Spellman-educated smile. That's why we're filing the preemptive forensic audit tomorrow morning. We're going to the court and declaring that you discovered the fraud. You're the whistleblower, Simone, not the co-conspirator. You'll be the one the government works with to recover the assets.
He thinks he's playing the king, Malik added, but he doesn't realize he's playing on a board where we already own all the pieces. I looked at the screen. I saw a photo of the Alpharetta house Marcus had hidden in the shadows. I saw the list of luxury brands he'd been buying for Crystal. The Chanel bags, the Cartier bracelets, the $500 dinners. I want him to feel it, I said. I don't just want him caught. I want him to watch it all vanish while he's standing in the middle of that Vegas casino, thinking he's at the top of the world. Oh, he'll feel it, Janelle said. But before that, we have one more thing to handle. Malik found something else, something physical. Malik pulled up a grainy image from a doorbell camera. It was Marcus, 3 nights ago, sneaking into the back of our Buckhead house while I was at the hospital. He wasn't alone. He had a small vial in his hand, and he was talking to Tasha. I caught the audio from the kitchen camera you hid, Malik said. He told Tasha, she's getting too suspicious. We need to keep her foggy until the Collier Heights deal clears. A little extra in her tea won't hurt. She's a pharmacist. She'll just think she's overworked. My blood turned to ice. He wasn't just stealing my money. He wasn't just stealing my house. He was trying to poison my mind to keep his scam alive. He was using my own profession, the very thing I loved, as a weapon against me. He called it therapy for your attitude, Janelle hissed. The narcissist couldn't handle you being 3 steps ahead, so he tried to slow you down. I stood up straight. The gray rock was gone. I was something much sharper now. Janelle, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, I need that toxicology report on the tea samples I saved, and I need it signed by a board-certified lab. I already sent it out, Janelle said. We get the results Monday. Good, I said. Because on Tuesday, Marcus isn't just going to Vegas, he's going to an audition for the role of a lifetime, the role of a man who realized too late that you never, ever try to outsmart a Spellman sister who knows how to read a lab report. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline. The city was full of lights, but all I could see was the darkness Marcus had tried to wrap around me. He thought he'd won. He thought I was just a boring pharmacist counting her little pills. He forgot that pharmacists don't just count pills. We understand the chemistry of a reaction, and I was about to create a reaction that would burn his M legacy to the ground. Now, y'all, I've seen a lot of things in my years behind that pharmacy counter, but nothing could have prepared me for the results that popped up on my phone on Monday morning. After leaving Malik and Janelle in their high-tech Midtown fortress, I'd spent the weekend moving like a shadow in my own house. I was playing the part of the overworked, foggy wife to perfection, while Marcus was busy resting his fake injured brain by scrolling through $3,000 watch catalogs. I met Janelle at a quiet, tucked-away table at the St. Regis in Buckhead. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of $400 candles and the hushed tones of people who have never had to worry about a light bill in their lives. We ordered 2 pots of herbal tea that cost $45 apiece, a price that would have made Big Mama faint right there on her plastic-covered sofa. Janelle didn't say a word. She just slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the table. Inside was the result of the private toxicology screen I'd paid $2,500 for. "The math is in, Simone," Janelle said, her voice as sharp as a scalpel. "And it's uglier than we thought."
I opened the folder. My eyes skipped past the technical jargon and landed on the bolded lines. Promethazine and zolpidem. High concentrations. I felt a coldness wash over me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. As a pharmacist, I knew exactly what those were. One is a heavy-duty sedative. The other is a powerful sleep aid. When you mix them at these dosages, you aren't just tired. You're a zombie. You're confused. You're foggy. "He wasn't just gaslighting me," I whispered. My voice didn't shake. It felt like it was carved out of granite. He was chemically ensuring I looked like a narcissist's dream, a wife who couldn't even remember if she'd signed a $5 million mortgage. "He's been slipping it into your evening tea for at least 6 months, Janelle added, leaning in. Malik pulled the footage from the hidden kitchen cam. We've got Marcus on video using a dropper bottle he kept hidden in a hollowed-out book in the library, a book on mindfulness, no less. The audacity of this man is a whole different level of sick." I thought back to all those nights I'd felt dizzy. I remembered the way Miss Hattie and Tasha, his ultimate flying monkeys, would look at me with that fake pity. They'd say things like, "Oh, Simone, maybe you should take a leave from the hospital. You're clearly not yourself. Marcus is so worried about your mental state." They were the enablers. They weren't just watching him destroy me, they were handing him the matches. "I was the scapegoat for his entire failure," I said. I looked down at my tea, the same kind of tea he'd used as a weapon. He wanted the court to see a woman who was too unstable to manage her own finances. He wanted to be the hero who cared for his sick wife, while he was actually the one making her sick. The lab fees were $3,450.50, but they're worth every penny, Janelle said. "This isn't just a divorce anymore, Simone. This is attempted poisoning. This is a felony." I closed the folder. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just thought about Big Mama. She used to tell me, "Simone, never let a man see you sweat. And never let him see your full hand until you're ready to take the whole pot."
He's going to Vegas tomorrow, I said. He thinks he's going to celebrate his cognitive recovery gala success with $50,000 of that developer's money. He thinks I'm sitting at home in a drug-induced haze, waiting for him to come back and tell me what to do.
What's the move? Janelle asked. I'm gonna give him one last chance, I said. A small, cold smile touched my lips. A boundaries dinner, tonight, at the Garden Room. The Garden Room is one of the most exclusive spots in Atlanta. You can't get a table without a 3-month wait, but I knew the owner's wife. I'd caught a dangerous drug interaction in her prescription last year, and she'd told me I always had a seat. You're going to confront him? Janelle looked worried. No, I said. I'm going to play the fool one last time. I'm going to ask him to be honest. I'm going to give him the chance to tell me the truth about the money, the amnesia, and the Alpharetta house. I want to see if there's even a shred of humanity left in him before I pull the trigger on everything we've built with Malik. I left the St. Regis and drove to a boutique in Phipps Plaza. I spent $1,800 on a stunning, understated dress from La Perla and a pair of Jimmy Choo heels that cost $950. If I was going to be the victim of a narcissist one last time, I was going to look like $1 million while doing it. That evening, Marcus arrived at the restaurant looking like the king he thought he was. He had on a custom-tailored suit from Sid Mashburn that cost $2,400. He sat across from me, looking around the lush, flower-filled room like he owned the place. "This is a nice surprise, Simone," he said, his voice dripping with that fake therapy softness. "I'm glad you're feeling clear-headed enough to be out. I was worried the stress of the gala would be too much for your delicate state." "I'm feeling much better, Marcus," I said. I watched him order a bottle of Krug champagne, which the menu listed for $850. "I actually wanted to talk to you about the future, about us." Marcus sighed, a dramatic sound that was supposed to make me feel guilty. "Simone, we've talked about this. My amnesia, it makes things hard. I need space. I need my foundation. I need you to trust that I'm doing what's best for our M legacy." "Marcus," I said, leaning forward. I kept my voice gentle. "I found a paper today, a deed for a house in Alpharetta, and I saw some activity in a crypto wallet. If you're in trouble, or if you've made some mistakes, just tell me now. We can fix it together. No lawyers, no courts, just the truth." I watched his face. For a split second, I saw it, the flash of panic. Then the mask of the fake baller slammed back down, harder than ever. "Are you accusing me of something?" he hissed, his voice turning sharp. "This is exactly what the doctor said. Your paranoia is a symptom of your breakdown. I don't know anything about a house in Alpharetta. You're probably hallucinating again. Maybe you should go home and have some of that tea I made for you." He laughed, a cold, arrogant sound that echoed against the glass walls of the restaurant. He didn't even realize he'd just confirmed he was the one making the tea. "You're right," I said, leaning back. I took a slow sip of water. I didn't touch the champagne. "I must be confused. My mistake." "Don't let it happen again," Marcus said, checking his $45,000 watch. "I have a big flight tomorrow. Business. You wouldn't understand." He thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully gaslit me into silence one last time. He thought he was gonna fly to Vegas and spend my inheritance while I stayed home and rested. But he forgot one small thing. I'm a pharmacist. I know that for every poison, there is an antidote, and the one I'd prepared for him was going to be delivered in a courtroom, not a teacup. As he walked away to network with someone at the bar, I pulled out my phone and sent a one-word text to Janelle and Malik. "No. Execute."
He thought he'd turn me into a ghost in my own home, but he forgot that a ghost is the last thing you want haunting your bank account. Now, y'all, after that dinner at the garden room, I realized I wasn't dealing with a man who was just lost. I was dealing with a man who had decided his lies were more valuable than my life. I watched him strut away from our table, probably heading over to some investor to brag about how he'd just put his confused wife in her place. I didn't let a single tear fall. I just paid the bill, which, with that $850 bottle of Krug he didn't even finish, came to $1,122.40, and walked out into the cool Atlanta night. The next morning, the sun hadn't even finished rising over Buckhead when the chaos started. Marcus was in our master suite, throwing clothes into a set of Rimowa suitcases that cost $2,100 apiece. He was humming a song, looking like a man who just won the lottery, instead of a man who just tried to poison his wife's mind. "I'm heading to the private terminal at DeKalb Peachtree," Marcus said, not even looking at me as he tucked a pair of $350 Tom Ford swim trunk into his bag. "The foundation has some major donors in Vegas. I'll be gone for 4 days. Don't call me unless the house is literally on fire, Simone. I need to focus on my cognitive alignment meetings." "Vegas for cognitive recovery?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. I had my gray rock face on tight. "That seems like a lot of stimulation for someone with amnesia, Marcus." He stopped packing and turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "That's the problem with you. You're always looking for the negative. This trip is being funded by the Foundation's hospitality grant, $30,000 set aside specifically for networking. If you'd gone to an HBCU for business instead of just counting pills, you'd understand how the world actually works." The audacity of him trying to use my Spellman education against me while he was using a grant he'd stolen from my savings was almost impressive. "Marcus," I said, and I made my voice soft. I wanted to give him one last exit ramp before the cliff. "I'm going to ask you one more time, before you get on that plane, is there anything you want to tell me? About the Alpharetta house, about the McLegacy accounts? If you come clean right now, I can still talk to the bank. I can tell them it was all part of your confusion. We can fix this before it becomes a legal matter." Marcus let out a laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping on a sidewalk. He zipped up his suitcase with a violent snap. "You really are delusional, aren't you?" he hissed. He walked over to me, looming over me in that way narcissists do when they want to make you feel small. "There is no house, there is no scam, there is only a man who is tired of being anchored to a woman who has zero vision. When I get back from Vegas, things are going to change. I'm filing for a legal guardianship over you, Simone." "Since you're so faint and confused all the time, the court will agree that I should be the one managing your trust." He'd said it. He'd finally said the quiet part out loud. He didn't just want to leave me, he wanted to own me. He wanted to turn me into a ward of the state so he could spend every dime I'd ever worked for while I sat in a facility somewhere. "I see," I said. My heart was thumping, but my voice was cold. "Safe travels, Marcus." "Bless your heart," he smirked, grabbing his luggage. "Try not to burn the house down while I'm gone." As soon as his Land Rover pulled out of the driveway, I didn't reach for my tea. I reached for my phone. 10 minutes later, I was back in Janelle's office. Malik was already there, his fingers dancing across those NASA-sized monitors. Janelle was wearing a sleek black jumpsuit from Stella McCartney that cost $2,300, looking like she was ready for a funeral, Marcus's funeral. "He's on his way to the terminal," I said, sitting down. "He rejected the olive branch. He actually threatened to put me under guardianship." Janelle's eyes turned into cold flints. He's a narcissist, Simone. They don't take exit ramps. They only know how to floor it until they hit a wall. And guess what? We just built the wall. Malik turned the screen around. I've finalized the technical trap. I've linked the M Legacy crypto wallet to a forensic audit trigger. The moment he lands at Harry Reid International in Vegas and tries to pay for his $10,000 suite at the Wynn, the transaction will flag. But it's not just a bank flag, it's an IRS jeopardy assessment. Explain that to me in pharmacist terms, Malik, I said. It means we've provided the government with enough evidence of wire fraud and tax evasion that they can freeze his entire digital life without a 3-month investigation, Janelle explained. We used the records of the $50,000 earnest money he took for Big Mama's swampland. Since he accepted that money under false pretenses across state lines, it's now a federal matter. How much did the audit cost? I asked. $12,600, Janelle said. But don't worry, we're billing it back to the estate as a necessary discovery expense during the divorce filing. And the toxicology? Filed with the Fulton County District Attorney this morning, Janelle said. We didn't just send the lab results. We sent the video of him using the dropper in the kitchen. They've already assigned a lead investigator. I looked at the clock. Marcus's flight was scheduled to take off at 10:30 a.m. It was a private charter that cost $5,500 for the seat. I want to see the moment it happens, I said.
You will, Malik said. I've mirrored his phone's notifications to this tablet. You'll see every declined message, every account frozen alert, and every panicked text he sends to Tasha.
Speaking of Tasha, I said, where is the golden child's sister? She's currently at a high-end spa in Chateau Elan, Janelle said, checking her own phone. She spent $2,400 this morning on a full-body diamond scrub. She thinks she's celebrating her new life as a M Legacy executive. Let her enjoy the diamonds while they last, I said, because the only thing she's going to be scrubbing soon is a prison floor. We sat in silence for a moment. The hum of the computers the only sound in the room. I thought about the 7 years I'd spent with Marcus. I thought about the Sunday dinners where I'd been the scapegoat, and the church mothers who had looked at me with pity while Marcus put $500 in the collection plate with my money. I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't the gray rock anymore. I was the architect of a collapse. He's in the air, Malik announced. Wheels up. I picked up the tablet. I watched the little icon of his plane moving across the map toward Nevada. He was probably sitting in that leather seat, sipping $400 cognac, thinking about how he was going to spend the $850,000 in his crypto wallet. He was probably dreaming about his new life with Crystal in the Alpharetta mansion. He thought he'd successfully gaslit me into oblivion. He thought he'd stolen my legacy and replaced it with brain fog. But as that plane crossed the state line, I saw the first notification pop up on the screen. It wasn't a bank alert. It was a message from the private terminal's billing department. Transaction refused. Account restricted. I leaned back in Janelle's $15,000 oak chair and took a sip of my own tea, the kind I'd made myself with no therapy added. The math is finally mathing, Marcus, I whispered to the screen. He was 30,000 feet in the air, but he was about to find out that the higher you fly on a lie, the harder you hit the truth. And the best part? I was the one who had cleared the runway. Now, y'all, if there was ever a time I wished I had a bucket of popcorn and a front row seat to a comedy show, it was the morning of our final asset division hearing. Marcus had crawled back from Vegas with his tail between his legs after every single one of his M Legacy cards was declined at the Wynn. He'd spent 3 days stuck in a hotel lobby because he couldn't even pay the $500 incidentals deposit, and he'd had to beg Tasha to wire him money from her own dwindling business account just to get a flight back to Atlanta.
But you'd never know he was struggling by the way he rolled into that courtroom. He wasn't walking. He was being pushed in a high-tech $5,200 motorized wheelchair, wearing a neck brace that looked like it had been freshly pulled from a medical supply box. He had a beige blanket draped over his lap, probably a $400 Hermes knockoff, and he was slumped over like he didn't have a single bone in his spine.
"Look at him," Janelle whispered, leaning toward me. She was sitting in the front row of the gallery, looking like $1,000,000 in a $3,500 suit from Acris. "He's really going for the Oscar today, Simone."
"He's going for the bank account, Janelle," I replied, my voice steady. "But he's about to find out the vault is closed." Sterling, his shark of a lawyer, stood up and straightened his silk tie, a $250 piece from Ferragamo, before addressing Judge Miller. The courtroom was packed. Miss Hattie was there, sitting directly behind Marcus, clutching a Bible like it was a weapon and wearing a hat that probably cost $600 from a boutique in Buckhead. Tasha was right next to her, looking at me with eyes that could have melted lead. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice echoing through the chamber, "my client's condition has deteriorated significantly since the last hearing. The stress of this financial interrogation by the petitioner has caused a severe relapse in his cognitive function. He is currently suffering from acute neuroinflammation, and yet Mrs. Robinson continues to hoard the $550,000 in equity from their joint property, while her husband can't even afford his basic physical therapy." I sat there, the gray rock in the middle of a storm. I was wearing a simple charcoal gray dress from Theory that cost $450. I didn't have on a single piece of flashy jewelry. I looked like a woman who worked hard and minded her business, because I was. "Hoarding?" I muttered to myself. The math really wasn't mathing for them. I'd been the one paying the $2,800 monthly mortgage on Big Mama's house for years, while Marcus was out buying limited edition sneakers that cost $1,200 a pair. "Your Honor," my lawyer, Sarah, a fierce Howard grad who'd been on a $5,000 retainer for months, stood up. "We are happy to discuss the equity, but first we'd like to address the financial abuse Mr. Sterling is alleging. My client has provided every bank statement from the last 7 years. We are still waiting for Mr. Marcus to provide the login credentials for the M Legacy Holdings account that he opened using my client's forged signature." Marcus let out a low, pathetic moan from his wheelchair. He started shaking his head back and forth, his eyes rolled back. I don't know what that is," Marcus whimpered. His voice was thin and shaky, like a child's. "The names, the numbers, it's all just gray. I just want to go home. Mama, I want to go home." Miss Hattie stood up, her face twisted in rage. "This is a sin. This woman is a narcissist. She's gaslighting a sick man in the house of the Lord. I mean, the house of the law. She's been the enabler of his stress for years, and now she wants to see him in the street." "Sit down, Mrs. Robinson," Judge Miller barked, banging her gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. "One more outburst like that, and you'll be watching this hearing from the holding cell downstairs." Miss Hattie sat, but she didn't stop glaring. If looks could kill, I'd have been buried in a $12,000 casket an hour ago. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, leaning forward, "you're asking me to award your client a $200,000 lump sum payment from the Emergency Equity Fund, while he still hasn't provided a full accounting of his own shell companies.
You claim he has amnesia, yet we have records of him attempting to authorize a $50,000 wire transfer from a private terminal just last Tuesday." Sterling didn't even flinch. That man had the audacity of 1,000 con artists. "That transfer was an automated business directive set up before the accident, Your Honor. My client had no knowledge of it. He is a victim of his own success and his wife's greed. He needs that $200,000 for a specialized treatment in Switzerland that costs $15,000 a week." I looked at Marcus. He was still slumped in that wheelchair, playing the part of the broken man. He thought he was so smart. He thought that by putting on a neck brace and a blanket, he could hide the fact that he was currently wearing a Patek Philippe watch under his sleeve, a watch I'd tracked on the M Legacy credit card statement for $45,000. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice calm and sharp, "we believe the specialized treatment Mr. Marcus needs can be found right here in Atlanta. In fact, we've prepared a short presentation that might clear up some of the fog regarding his medical and financial status." "A presentation?" Sterling scoffed. "This isn't a TED Talk, counsel. This is a court of law." "It's a red wedding reveal, Your Honor," Sarah said, giving me a tiny, knowing wink. "And we've brought the receipts." The judge looked intrigued. She'd clearly had enough of Marcus's performance. "I'll allow it," Judge Miller said. "Set up the projector." I watched as Malik, who was sitting in the back of the room disguised as a court reporter, stood up and started connecting a cable to the courtroom's large monitor. My heart was thumping in my chest, short, punchy beats that felt like a countdown. Marcus didn't move, but I saw his fingers twitch against the beige blanket. He was still trying to be the gray rock, but he didn't realize that I was the one who had built the mountain he was standing on. "Before we begin," Sarah said, looking directly at Marcus, "I'd like to remind Mr. Marcus that he is currently under oath. If his amnesia suddenly clears during this video, I suggest he tells the truth immediately." Marcus didn't respond. He just let out another one of his sick sighs and closed his eyes, acting like he was too weak to even look at the screen. "First slide, please," Sarah said. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a bank statement. It wasn't a medical report. It was a high-definition video of a man standing on a balcony in Alpharetta, holding a glass of champagne that cost $550 and laughing with a woman in a silk slip dress. The man in the video wasn't wearing a neck brace. He wasn't in a wheelchair. He was doing a little dance, shouting, "The math is mathing now, baby. The pharmacist finally signed it." The silence in that courtroom was so heavy you could have felt it in your bones. I looked at Marcus. His eyes were wide open now. The amnesia hadn't just cleared, it had evaporated. His face was turning a shade of purple that matched the $800 silk pocket square Tasha was wearing. "He thought he'd won," I whispered to Janelle, "but he forgot one small thing." "What's that?" Janelle asked. "I still had the keys to the cloud," I said, "and the cloud never forgets." Now, y'all, if the silence in that courtroom after the balcony video was loud, what happened next was a straight-up earthquake. Marcus was sitting in that $5,200 motorized wheelchair, and for the first time since this whole amnesia circus started, he looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. The neuroinflammation he'd been faking seemed to turn into a very real, very purple case of pure panic. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice cracking as he adjusted his $250 Ferragamo tie, "this video, it's out of context. It's a deep fake. It's a clear attempt by the petitioner to manufacture evidence." Judge Miller didn't even look at him. She was staring at the screen. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling. Sarah, you said there was audio?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah said. She was standing tall, looking like a queen in her custom power suit. This isn't just a video of a man enjoying a $5,200,000 home he claims doesn't exist. This is the audio from the VIP lounge at his Cognitive Recovery Gala, the night he thought he'd finally buried my client's future. Malik hit a button on his laptop. The courtroom speakers hummed for a second, and then Marcus's voice filled the room. It wasn't the shaky, confused whisper he'd been using for the judge. It was loud. It was arrogant. It was the voice of a man who thought he was untouchable. "Can you believe she signed it?" Marcus's voice boomed through the chamber, accompanied by the distinct clink of a glass. "She actually thought I was going to use the money for therapy. That pharmacist is as dumb as she is boring. The developer already wired the $50,000 earnest money deposit for the Collier Heights property to the M Legacy account. We're heading to Vegas on Tuesday, Crystal. I've got a $10,000 suite booked at the Wynn." I watched Miss Hattie. Her face went from church mother piety to total ashy gray in 3 seconds. She gripped her Bible so hard I thought the leather was going to snap. Tasha wasn't doing much better. She was frantically trying to hide her $12,500 Birkin bag under the bench like the FBI wasn't already watching.
But the recording wasn't done.
"What about the judge?" A woman's voice, Crystal's, asked on the tape. "Isn't she going to ask questions?" Marcus let out a laugh that made my skin crawl. "Judge Miller? Please. That senile old woman just wants to get to her lunch break. I've got her wrapped around my finger with this Amnesia act. I walk in there, look a little confused, moan about the darkness, and she practically hands me the keys to Simone's trust fund. The math is mathing, baby, and it's all going in my pocket." The air in the courtroom actually felt like it disappeared. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Judge Miller slowly took off her glasses and set them on her desk. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked like the wrath of God in a black robe. "Your Honor?" Sterling started, but the judge just held up one hand. "Not another word, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice like ice. Then the recording hit the final nail. "The best part," Marcus's voice continued, dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly clear thanks to Malik's $5,600 microphones, "is that the deed I had her sign isn't even for the Collier Heights house. I slipped the power of attorney for her grandfather's inheritance trust right behind it. By the time she realizes she's broke, we'll be living in that $5 million Alpharetta estate full-time, and she'll be in a state-funded facility recovering from the little cocktails I've been making for her tea." That was it. The red wedding was over, and the villains were the only ones left bleeding. Marcus didn't moan this time. He didn't shake his head. He actually stood up. He forgot he was supposed to be paralyzed. He forgot the neck brace. He ripped the beige Hermes knockoff blanket off his lap and stood on his own 2 feet, pointing a finger at me. "You trapped me!" he screamed. The fake baller mask was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of a cornered narcissist. "You've been spying on me. This is illegal. You're a bitter, disgruntled pharmacist who couldn't handle the fact that I'm a king. I built that M legacy. I deserve that $5 million. "Mr. Marcus," the judge roared, banging her gavel like she was trying to break the bench. "Sit down this instant." But Marcus was past listening. He turned to the gallery, looking at the flying monkeys who had enabled him. "Mama, tell them she's crazy." Miss Hattie didn't say a word. She just looked at the floor, her $600 hat crooked on her head. She knew the game was up. "I have heard enough." Judge Miller said, her voice vibrating with authority. Mr. Marcus, you are hereby held in direct contempt of this court. Furthermore, based on the evidence of wire fraud, forgery, and what sounds like an admission of attempted poisoning, I am notifying the district attorney's office immediately. Sterling looked like he wanted to melt into his $900 an hour shoes. Your Honor, we'd like to move for a recess to— Recess denied, she snapped. Bailiffs, please take Mr. Marcus into custody, and I want those M legacy accounts frozen before he even makes it to the holding cell. Mrs. Robinson, your request for an immediate forensic audit and full control of all joint assets is granted, effective right now. I watched the bailiffs move in. They didn't treat him like a king. They grabbed him by the arms of his custom-tailored suit, the one I'd paid $2,400 for, and jerked him out of the wheelchair. The cuffs clicked shut. That sound, it was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. It was the sound of 7 years of gaslighting finally coming to an end. It was the sound of the gray rock finally crushing the snake. Marcus was sobbing now, his amnesia completely forgotten as he begged for his mother. Mama, don't let them take me. Simone, tell them you waited up, please. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, observing the wreckage. I wasn't the scapegoat anymore. I wasn't the boring pharmacist. I was the only person in that room with a clear conscience and a full bank account. As they dragged him past my table, he looked at me. His eyes were full of hate, but they were also full of something else, realization. He finally understood that he hadn't been playing a dumb woman for 7 years. He'd been playing a woman who understood the chemistry of a reaction, and he was the one who had just blown up his own life. I looked at Tasha. She was trying to sneak out the back door, but 2 plainclothes investigators were already waiting for her. They didn't care about her Fendi tracksuit or her $12,000 bag. They only cared about the M legacy documents in her hand. The math finally matched, Marcus, I whispered, though only I could hear it. The courtroom started to clear out, the flying monkeys scattering like roaches in the light. I stood up, smoothed out my $450 gray dress, and looked at Janelle. Is it done? I asked. Janelle smiled, her Spellman sister pride shining through. The freeze is in place. The Alpharetta house is being seized as an asset of the fraud. And Malik just got the notification. Marcus's King_Marcus88 wallet just hit a balance of $0. The government moved it all into an escrow account for you. I took a deep breath. The air in the courtroom didn't feel like the Arctic tundra anymore. It felt clean. It felt new. But as I walked toward the door, I saw one small thing on the floor. It was Marcus's Patek Philippe watch. It had fallen off during the scuffle with the bailiffs. $45,000 of stolen luxury, lying in the dirt. I didn't pick it up. I didn't even stop. I had a whole new life to start, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't need a single thing from Marcus Robinson to make it happen. I walked out of that courthouse and into the Atlanta sun. He thought he'd erased me, but he forgot one small thing. When you try to erase someone's life, you better make sure you aren't using a pen that you stole from them. Now, y'all, if you thought the courtroom was a circus, the processing area of the Fulton County Sheriff's Office was the grand finale. I watched the bailiffs march Marcus out of the courtroom in that $2,400 Sid Mashburn suit, but by the time I made it down to the station to finish my statement, that suit didn't look so king-like anymore. It was wrinkled, stained with his own sweat and tears, and the left sleeve was half ripped from where he tried to pull away when they led him to the transport van. The air in the station was thick with the smell of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a far cry from the $400 candles at the St. Regis, and I could tell the fake baller in Marcus was absolutely suffocating. I walked in with Janelle by my side. She was still looking pristine in her $3,500 suit, carrying a leather portfolio that held the final toxicology report and the digital logs of the $850,000 crypto theft. We were there to meet Investigator Vance, a no-nonsense woman who didn't care about Marcus's Mark legacy or his supposed amnesia.
"Mrs. Robinson," Vance said, nodding to me. She led us back toward the intake desks. "We're processing your husband, well, the defendant, right now. The district attorney is looking at a mountain of charges. We've got the wire fraud for the $50,000 earnest money, the forgery on the $5,200,000 Alpharetta mortgage, and now, thanks to your lab results, we're looking at felony administration of a controlled substance."
"The math is finally catching up to him," I said quietly. "Greyrock. I wasn't celebrating, I was just observing the medicine being administered." As we walked past the holding area, I saw him. Marcus was sitting on a cold metal bench, his $5,200 motorized wheelchair nowhere to be found. He was slumped over, his head in his hands, but the second he saw me through the glass, he bolted upright. "Simone!" he screamed, his voice cracking and echoing off the cinder block walls. "Simone, baby, you have to tell them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them the meds made me crazy. I didn't know what I was doing." A guard put a hand on his shoulder and shoved him back down onto the bench.
"I need to speak with him," I told Vance. "One last time. For the record." Vance looked at Janelle, then at me. 5 minutes, and keep it professional. They led me into a small, cramped interview room with a plexiglass divider. Marcus was brought in a moment later. He wasn't wearing his neck brace anymore. The police had taken it as unnecessary medical equipment during the search. He looked like a man who had finally realized the stage lights had been turned off and the audience had gone home.
"Simone," he whispered, pressing his hands against the glass. He was still wearing that Patek Philippe watch, though a technician was waiting outside to log it as evidence. "Think about our 7 years. Think about Sunday dinner at Big Mama's. Think about the legacy we were building. You can't let them do this to me. I'm a golden child, Simone. I don't belong in a place like this."
"That's the problem, Marcus," I said, leaning in. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "You spent 7 years trying to build a legacy on a foundation of sand and my bank account. You thought because I went to an HBCU and valued my community and my family that I was too traditional to see a snake in the grass. You thought my boring pharmacy career made me a target, but it actually made me an expert in identifying toxins."
"I was sick," he yelled, his face turning that ugly narcissistic purple again. "The stress of providing for you, the pressure of the M legacy, it broke me. That Alpharetta house was for us. I forged your name because I knew you'd be too gray rock to take the risk. I was doing it for our future."
"Our future?" I asked. I pulled a photo out of Janelle's portfolio. It was a screenshot of the $10,000 suite reservation at the Wynn in Vegas. Was Crystal going to be part of that future too? Was she going to live in the $5 million mansion while I was recovering in a state facility from the tea you were drugging?
Marcus froze. He looked at the photo, then back at me. The fake baller tried to make one last stand. "Crystal is just a consultant," he snapped. The math was complicated. You don't understand high-level finance, Simone. You're just a pill counter. I'm a visionary."
"Actually," I said, sliding a $250 leather folder across the table toward the investigator standing by the door, "the math is very simple. You stole $850,000 from my inheritance. You attempted to sell property that didn't belong to you for $575,000. And you spent $4,600 on cognac while our light bill was 2 months past due.
I stood up. I didn't want to hear another word of his therapy vocabulary. I didn't want to hear about his boundaries or how I was the narcissist for catching him.
You're going to be away for a long time, Marcus, I said. Investigator Vance tells me that with the poisoning charges and the federal wire fraud, you're looking at 12 to 15 years. That's a lot of time to work on your cognitive recovery.
Simone, you can't leave me here. He started banging on the glass, his loud, flashy persona crumbling into a messy, snotty heap. Mama, where's Tasha? Tasha will fix this. Tasha is currently in the next room over, Janelle said, stepping up beside me. She's being charged as an enabler and a co-conspirator. It turns out that $12,500 Birkin bag of hers was purchased with a forged business loan in Simone's name. The FBI is taking the bag, Tasha, and the Fendi tracksuit. Marcus let out a howl of pure, selfish agony. It wasn't because he felt bad for what he'd done to me. It was because he realized he was finally broke. He was finally a nobody. "Wait!" Marcus shouted as the guards started to pull him away. "Simone, I remember! I remember the wedding. I remember the night we met at Howard. I remember everything. My memory is back. Doesn't that count for something?" I stopped at the door and looked back. "It counts for perjury, Marcus," I said, "because you just admitted on camera that your traumatic amnesia was a lie you told under oath. Thanks for the confession." The look on his face was worth every cent I'd spent on Malik's $20,000 retainer. He realized he'd just talked himself into an even longer sentence while trying to manipulate me one last time. As I walked out of that interview room, the handcuff symphony began. It was the sound of the heavy steel doors slamming shut. It was the sound of the chains rattling as Marcus was led toward his cell. It was the sound of a fake rich man finally hitting the hard floor of reality. I walked out of the station and into the crisp evening air. My SUV was waiting, and for the first time in years, the passenger seat was empty, and the air was clear. "What now?" Janelle asked as we walked toward the car. "Now," I said, "I'm going to have a Sunday dinner, but I'm not going to Miss Hattie's. I'm going to Big Mama's house in Collier Heights. I'm going to sit on that porch, eat a $5 peach, and enjoy the fact that my mind is my own again." I got into the car and drove away. I didn't look back at the station. I didn't think about the $5 million mansion or the Tom Ford suits. I just thought about the $2,400 I was going to spend on a new security system for Big Mama's place, not to keep people out, but to make sure the only thing that ever entered that house again was the truth. Marcus thought he'd played the boring pharmacist, but he forgot that a pharmacist knows exactly what happens when the poison is finally purged from the system. You finally start to heal. Now, y'all, they say the wheels of justice grind slow, but when they finally caught up to Marcus Robinson, they ran him over like a freight train. It's been 3 months since that handcuff symphony at the precinct, and I've spent every single day since then watching the M legacy burn to the ground from the comfort of my own peace. If you thought Marcus looked bad in a wrinkled suit, you should have seen him on sentencing day. There was no $5,200 motorized wheelchair this time. There was no $400 Hermes knockoff blanket to hide his shaking hands. Marcus walked into that courtroom wearing a state-issued orange jumpsuit that didn't have a designer label, And for a man who used to spend $300 just on his haircuts, seeing him with a jagged, buzzed head was the ultimate financial porn in reverse. He looked small. He looked cheap. He looked like the 3-cent transfer I'd sent to his account just to see if he was watching. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, standing in front of a mountain of folders that Malik and Janelle had curated like a fine art gallery. The defendant didn't just steal, he orchestrated a calculated campaign of domestic terrorism against his own wife. He siphoned $850,000 into a hidden crypto wallet, forged signatures on a $5,200,000 mortgage, and chemically altered the petitioner's state of mind using a cocktail of sedatives that cost him nothing but his soul. I sat in the front row, wearing a simple cream silk blouse from Vince that cost $325 and a pair of tailored black trousers. I didn't need the flashy $5,000 diamond studs anymore. My gray rock had turned into a fortress. Marcus's sister, Tasha, was sitting a few feet away from him in the jury box, also in orange. Her $550 Versace sunglasses were gone, and her $12,500 Birkin bag had been auctioned off by the feds 2 weeks ago to help cover the restitution. She looked like she'd been crying for a month straight, especially since her 5-year sentence for wire fraud had already been handed down that morning. Then there was Miss Hattie. Y'all, the church mother mask didn't just slip, it evaporated. She was sitting in the back row, her $600 hat replaced by a plain headscarf. The flying monkeys in her congregation had completely turned on her once the news broke that she'd used $10,000 of donated church building funds to help Marcus hide the earnest money from the swampland scam. She wasn't leading the choir anymore. She was waiting for a ride to her own probation hearing. "Mr. Robinson," Judge Miller said, her voice sounding like a gavel even when she wasn't using one. "You spent years pretending to be a king while you were nothing more than a parasite. You tried to erase the woman who built the very chair you sat in. For the charges of grand larceny, forgery, wire fraud, and felony administration of a controlled substance, I am sentencing you to 12 years in a state correctional facility." Marcus let out a sound that wasn't even human. It was a high-pitched, desperate wail that echoed off the high ceilings of the courtroom. 12 years? He shrieked, his amnesia long gone. "I'll be 50. My life is over. Simone, tell her I'm a visionary. I have plans. I have the M legacy." "The only legacy you have, Mr. Robinson," the judge snapped, "is a mountain of debt and a prison ID number. Bailiffs, remove him." As they dragged him out, I watched the reality of his prison yard blues set in. He wasn't going to a 5-star resort in Switzerland for cognitive recovery. He was going to a cell that was smaller than the walk-in closet in our Buckhead house. A closet where he used to keep 60 pairs of sneakers that cost an average of $600 each. Every single one of those sneakers had been seized. The Land Rover? Repossessed. The $5,200,000 Alpharetta mansion? Sold at a sheriff's auction to pay back the bank. The Louis XIII cognac? Poured down the drain of a cold reality. The fake baller was officially bankrupted in every sense of the word. I walked out of the courtroom and felt the weight of 7 years finally lift off my shoulders. I didn't feel happy exactly. I felt clean, like the dose had finally been adjusted and the poison was gone. Janelle met me at the curb in her Porsche. "It's over, Spellman's sister. The final audit just cleared. After the restitution and the seizure of his crypto wallet, you're looking at a recovery of $792,043. The math finally matched, I said.
leaning my head back against the leather seat.
So what's the plan for tonight? Janelle asked. Celebration dinner? I know a spot that does a 5-course tasting menu for $600 a person.
No, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I'm going back to Collier Heights. I'm going to sit on Big Mama's porch with a plate of peach cobbler and a glass of sweet tea that I made myself. I don't need a $600 dinner to feel like a queen.
I hear that, Janelle laughed. But as we pulled away from the courthouse, I saw a woman standing on the corner. It was Crystal, the lifestyle influencer who had been living in the Alpharetta house. She was standing there with 2 battered suitcases, wearing a cheap tracksuit that definitely wasn't La Perla. She looked lost, her private equity king having vanished into the back of a prison transport van. I didn't stop. I didn't offer a ride. I didn't even roll down the window. She had been a flying monkey for the wrong man, and now she was finding out what happens when the circus closes down. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully gaslit me into a state facility so he could live a life of luxury on my hard-earned $850,000. He forgot that a pharmacist knows exactly how to handle a narcissist. You don't argue with them. You don't try to change them. You just document the toxicity, prepare the antidote, and wait for the system to flush them out. I watched the courthouse disappear in the rearview mirror. Marcus was heading for 12 years of gray walls and bad food. I was heading for a 10-acre estate I'd just put a deposit on in Cascades, a property that cost $2,400,000 and was paid for entirely with my own clean, unforged money. The M legacy was dead. Long live the Simone legacy. But as I looked at the paperwork for my new estate in my lap, I noticed one small thing I'd overlooked in the final settlement. A small hidden account Marcus had opened in Big Mama's name years ago. He thought he'd hidden one last secret, but he forgot I'm the one who handles the archives. Now, y'all, if you ever wondered what peace smells like, let me tell you. It smells like fresh Georgia pine, expensive lavender candles, and a bank account that finally makes sense. After the judge handed Marcus those 12 years and Tasha her 5, the noise in my life just stopped. It was like I'd been living next to a construction site for 7 years and somebody finally turned off the jackhammer. I'm sitting here on the terrace of my new estate in Cascades. The property is 10 acres of lush green privacy that cost me $2,400,000. I didn't need a fake baller to co-sign the mortgage, and I didn't need to forge a single name. I paid for it with my own savings, the recovered inheritance, and the settlement from the bank for their oversight on Marcus's shell accounts. Everything about this house is financial porn at its finest. My outdoor kitchen features a custom wood-fire pizza oven that cost $12,000 and a sub-zero wine fridge that set me back another $6,800. I'm currently lounging in a cream cashmere set from Loro Piana that cost $3,600, sipping a glass of 40-year-old Highland Park Scotch that retails for $3,500 a bottle. On my wrist, I'm not wearing the gilt jewelry Marcus used to buy me. I'm wearing a Cartier Love bracelet in 18-karat gold that I bought for myself for $7,350. It doesn't represent a lie. It represents the fact that I finally learned how to love myself enough to walk away. My phone buzzed on the teak side table. It was Janelle. "Hey, Spellman sister." Janelle's voice sounded lighter than I'd ever heard it. "I just got the final report from Malik. You won't believe what we found in that hidden account Marcus opened in Big Mama's name." "Tell me," I said, watching the sunset dip below the tree line. There was $120,000 in there, Janelle said. He thought he was being slick, using her name to hide his emergency cash. He probably thought he'd come back for it after he lost his memory and divorced you. But since it was in Big Mama's name and she left everything to you, that money just legally transferred into your primary account 10 minutes ago. I let out a soft laugh. The math just keeps on mathing, Janelle. It sure does. Oh, and one more thing. I heard from a friend who works at the facility where Marcus is being held. Apparently, he tried to tell the guards he was a private equity king and shouldn't have to do laundry duty. They gave him an extra shift scrubbing the floors with a toothbrush. He's currently crying in his bunk because they won't let him wear his Sid Mashburn loafers. Bless his heart, I said, and for the first time, I actually meant it. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel bitter, I just felt done. I hung up the phone and looked out over my land. I thought back to those Sunday dinners at Miss Hattie's, where I was the scapegoat, eating burnt ends while the golden child bragged about $5 million mansions that weren't even his. I thought about the therapy vocabulary they used to gaslight me, trying to make me believe I was the narcissist for wanting to know where my own money was going. They wanted me to be the gray rock because they thought a rock was something you could just walk over. They didn't realize that if you trip over the wrong rock, you'll end up face down in the dirt. I'm not the scapegoat anymore. I'm not the enabler. And I'm definitely not the boring pharmacist. I stood up and walked toward my outdoor infinity pool, which cost $150,000 to install. I looked at my reflection in the water. I looked healthy. My eyes were clear. The fog Marcus tried to drug me with had been gone for months, replaced by a sharp, crystal-clear vision of my future. I'm going to spend my days running my consulting firm and my nights enjoying the quiet. I might even start a scholarship at Howard or Spelman for women who want to enter the financial forensics field. So the next time a fake baller tries to slide a quitclaim deed past a smart woman, she'll know exactly how to read between the lines. Marcus thought he could delete me. He thought he could erase 7 years of marriage and $300,000 a year in income like it was a bad dream. But he forgot the most important rule of the game. You never, ever try to outsmart a woman who has been counting the dosage her entire life. As the moon started to rise over Cascades, I felt a sense of self-worth that no luxury brand could ever provide. It wasn't about the $2 million house or the $7,000 bracelet. It was about the fact that I held my ground. I kept my receipts, and I stayed 3 steps ahead of the people who were supposed to love me most. My name is Simone. I am 38 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am the only one in charge of my story.